As you probably know from listening to this podcast, I am such a junkie when it comes to productivity. It is really surprising to me how we're all given the same 24 hours in a day. We're all given the same 365 days per year, but some people can get remarkable things done. Some people can build massive businesses. Some people can create multiple businesses that each generate the amount of income that some of us would love to have in our life. And there are also people who've been able to build great businesses while keeping a W-2, even as a route to leave that W-2. And today we're going to talk about someone who wrote a book called The Wealthy Gardener, who is really interesting because you don't have to be Bill Gates. You don't have to be someone who's going to build a VC-funded company as your route to get personal freedom. The author of this book and the guest of this show, someone that considers themselves to be a person that is a good example of what can happen if a otherwise normal person just commits to creating personal and financial freedom for themselves and the steps that they put in place to do that. So we're going to talk about impact hours, how to get the most out of your time. We're going to talk about the route towards financial freedom that this guest took. And we're going to talk about some of the things other than finances, just that personal element, that family element. Why teaching these strategies to friends, family, and other people in your network is such a powerful concept and something that really motivated the author of the book and the guest of the show today. So, hope you enjoy the content. Don't forget to like or subscribe and engage with us on iTunes or join our Cashflow Connections listener group on Facebook. There is so much back and forth on there. It's really helpful. I know a lot of people are learning a lot of stuff from the listener group. So if you're not in there, just go to Cashflow Connections listener group on Facebook. We post each episode in there, and there's always comments on there and questions and engaging stuff. So hope to see you in that group. All right, hope you enjoy the episode. How's it going, everyone? Our guest for today is John Soforic, who is an everyday self-made millionaire who advocates an intentional lifestyle so people can reach their financial and life goals. His $20,000 monthly passive income was built on what he calls impact hours, and he wrote a book on the topic as a legacy for his son. The book later became an Amazon bestseller and hit number 46 on Audible. The Wealthy Gardener is the name of the book and is about timeless principles to empower everyday people to get more impact out of their lives, a topic that we have talked about in many ways on this show, but I'm really excited to get into this conversation today. John, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Hunter. My pleasure.
So for the listeners that aren't familiar with you or haven't read your book quite yet, let's talk about you. I want to hear a little bit about your background and your pathway to some of these realizations that you talk about in your book, The Wealthy Gardener.
Sure. Blue collar town. I grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. Just like every other kid growing up, we played a lot of football, played a lot of sports, not too many distinct things in my background until I became Dr. John. I was known as Dr. John most of my adult life. I was known as Dr. John because I was a chiropractor. And the way I became a chiropractor is I tagged along with my dad when he went to a chiropractic visit. He got well in one visit. And as a 19-year-old, I looked around and I saw a boat sitting in the backyard. And I saw the chiropractor's part-time hours. And my eyes shifted from the hours to the boat, from the boat to the hours. And 6 years later, I'm a chiropractor. No kidding. That's the extent of my vocational guidance. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of boats when there weren't a whole lot of part-time hours in my life because I graduated with $200,000 worth of student debt. And that set up a struggle. And so by the age of 30, I now had a wife and two kids. I'm still paying off that debt. And it was getting frustrating to me because I just wasn't getting ahead. Something about that age of 30 made it feel real to me. And so I started reading a lot, and I really owe so much to a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It taught me to think bigger. And at that age, I set this goal for $240,000 passive income by my 50th birthday. And once I set that goal, I went to work, I went to battle, I say. And at the age of 49, I retired with that goal met, and I went into the book, and I wrote that book for my own children, just like you had talked about on the introduction. So that's the brief overview of my life.
Wow, interesting. So I'm very curious to hear how you were able to go from massive debt to what most people would consider financial freedom, in the sense that your passive income not only paid off your expenses, but you had the mindset that goes along with knowing that that passive income would continue to come in. The predictability, the reliability is a huge part of that whole experience. How did you start on that in terms of an investment standpoint? And along the ways, how did your investment strategies change to where you ended up with that $20,000 per month?
Sure. I'm a big believer in goals, Hunter, with flexible plans. I hold on to the goal, but I never know the plan. It changes so much, and I started out in the stock market. I didn't know any better, so I'm a chiropractor. I'm doing what everybody else does. I'm socking my money away, and I'm reading and I'm reading and reading. I'm learning about as much as I can about everything, how to do portfolio asset allocations, how to do all this kind of stuff. And I just got to the point where I can't understand how to control this. I felt an absolute lack of control. And so some of us are control freaks. And even with asset allocation, I'm trying to figure out, and I went right through that 2000 bubble. It burst. I lost 75% of my money and what little I had, which was everything. So that's what steered me. Sometimes I think we get steered by pain. I got steered by pain. I wasn't making anything. I was losing money over here. So now what? How do I find a strategy for me? I could see that in my area, and this isn't true across the board, all other areas of the country, but real estate was really effective in my area because of the price of properties and the return on rent. So there's different ratios you look for to see where it works, where it doesn't. I'm in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. So that's a whole lot different than Boston, San Francisco, New York, California. It's a whole different price code. So when I talk about real estate, I'm talking about cash on cash return. So I went deep into that study. A lot of the mindset you get is you have to go to school in these things. They're only safe if you know what you're doing. So I spent a lot of time reading book after book after book after book on renovation costs, on how much expense ratios, all this kind of stuff, how to manage people, how to manage projects, how to get them, all that stuff. So moving forward from the age of 30, once you get the goal to 35, I always think that's the hard part where you steer your life a little, you get some changes. The hardest part is getting that change made, those 5 years, that transition. And during that time, I bought a single family first because it was safe. You can always sell a single family. That's an easy exit strategy. I was being very conservative. And then another, and then another. And it starts to unwind. Once you decide and you commit and you go full in, you can get bigger properties. And that's exactly how it happened for me. So yeah, little by little, it's one base hit after the other. To answer your question, how do you go from an absolute kid sitting there at 30, really kind of down and defeated, to that guy that met his goals? Really, it's one day at a time. How do you take care of kids when the kids have colic? One day at a time. It's just, you've got to break it down into small days and small hours and use whatever time you have. It really comes down to that for me.
I'm definitely interested to talk about productivity. This is something that I have been a little bit obsessive about over the last 5 years in particular. Before we jump into that though, did you transition away from single family into commercial assets, into multifamily like a lot of people did, or did you continue to scale that multifamily business?
Yeah, you know what? To me, it was always about doors. So it's always about your cash flow. Like, I don't care if there's 4, I don't care if there's 10 units in an apartment, I don't care if there's 30. It doesn't matter to me. I'm looking for cash on cash return. And sometimes the market goes one way and sometimes it goes another. There was a period in 2008 where, so many foreclosures were coming on board that single families were the thing to go. It was actually cheaper for me, better cash on cash return with single families, because of the cheapness of those foreclosures. Now that's out of the way. Now all of a sudden, multifamilies will have a better margin. So I did start going a little more and more past 2010 into the multifamilies and apartments. That's just, you're following the math. That's all.
Right. Makes sense.
Just like you are as an investor in the stock market, where's the return and where's the safe return on the most you can get? And you're playing that whole game just like you are in the market.
In the bio, you mentioned something about impact hours. And I really like that terminology. What does that term refer to? And tell us a little bit about that concept.
That's me trying to break it all down. You got to figure out some sort of, like you called it, productivity, no question. We all have the same 24 hours. Now, I'm a guy basically in the middle class. I know I dress nice and I have my own clinic but I'm a guy in the middle class. How am I going to change my life going forward. And the only thing that I have is my time. How do I gain an advantage with my life without using that time in a different way? There's no way. That's the input for your impact, right? The hours you put in. It gets really, really tricky, even for smart people, to know exactly what activities produce the greatest impact and then plow in those activities into the time you've got each day. And so, yeah, maybe you get a little bit obsessive. Maybe you get a little productive, but that's big changes. Big changes of life come from those kind of big sacrifices, and you got to get so clear. So, an impact activity to me was 60 minutes of intense activity. You're usually focused very, very deeply. You're almost at the edge of your capacity, and that activity is going to lead you to whatever you say your goal is forward. That's what an impact is. I would count them. I would track my hours of impact in order to keep myself accountable. So that's how important it was for me.
So when it comes to something like this, I really like to have a clear idea of where I'm trying to go, because just trying super hard, there's a lot of thought leaders out in the world, especially social media, talking about just hustling and just output, output, output. That output is fine if you're just getting started. But if you're a doctor and you have kids and your schedule is already full, those hours now become extremely meaningful. And so you can't just go as hard as you can in a bunch of different directions. You have to actually have a clear line of vision to where you're trying to go, and then reverse engineer that goal to a hourly basis. How did you go about, you had the idea of being, quote, financially free, or the $20,000 per month, but how did you go about having, a vision of what you wanted your life to be? And then in the process of reverse engineering that vision, what are some of the things that came to light that gave you a clear understanding of how you should spend those very important 60 minutes?
Exactly. And I'll give you a quick analogy to even reinforce what you just said. It's just like a basketball team of seventh graders, right? They're running around and the coach is screaming, you just have to hustle more. You just aren't trying as hard as the other team. And it just creates this big, tired, exhausted team out there. And the kids are trying and they are doing, but that doesn't guarantee anything. And it's called unrewarded hustle. It's so common for us and as adults as well. We can give it all, but if we're not hitting the right thing, doing the right things, giving it all isn't going to create the impact we want. And so it's essential. It's not just talk of some sort of theory. My life depended on finding those impact activities and impact hours. You say in real estate, let's say, or let's say in stock market investing, depending on who's listening here, there is no question involved. You're going to have to find out in real estate, it's all about getting the right property at the right price. And you got to beat the pros to that. So if you really want to drill down beyond the theory here, how would I do that? Now, like you said, I have a full-time practice. I have a family. How can I beat the pros? They're out there full-time, right? So, okay, I develop a method. I come on my computer and I make this criteria. And I can see the properties online. I can see what they can generate in terms of income. I know what they're asking for them. And so you can kind of figure out what's your cash flow. And because you can kind of figure that out, now you can set up a criteria, which basically the purpose of which is to screen out everything, so that you're sitting there ready to pounce on the best. It's not too different from stocks, right? You just get all the mess out of your way so that you only see the gems, right? And it comes down to that in real estate. So first of all, I have that criteria that just really clears out 99.99% of all properties for me. So I'm sitting there with my cash in my pocket. That's the gunpowder waiting to shoot this property. After I would find that one show up, I used to find myself wasting time driving out and inspecting and doing stuff like that, which you would say, well, that's important. Okay, but Google Maps came along and all of a sudden I could put that property's address in, jump onto my computer, do a 360 and check out that neighborhood right here. Now I'm getting real efficient, you see. I'm down to the properties with the best returns. I can check out the roads without getting off my butt. And so now I'm really getting down to it. So only when I see a property I love and then one in a nice street, now I'll get my butt over there and move. And so it's just all about efficiencies. That's how I had to win. And I would beat the pros that way. So that's how you drill down and find out how to maximize my hours versus how when I started, I didn't maximize my hours and I was driving around doing all kind of stuff. And it was 20 hours a week and I wasn't being rewarded for those hours, so that's the whole concept of impact in your hours and streamlining down to effectiveness, really.
Yeah, agreed. And it's pretty remarkable. Having that hindrance can actually provide you with a framework in which to operate, which can actually set you up for long-term success. Like you have the hindrance of having a full-time job. So I need to create systems and processes and use applications that'll help me make this more streamlined and efficient. Those can pay dividends down the road versus someone that is able to work 50 or 60 hours a week exclusively focused on that one particular thing. Now, I recently wrote a book. It's called Raising Capital for Real Estate, about how to raise money for real estate deals. And I thought I knew enough to write the book. I mean, I have raised a lot of money in my life and found out that I could share this information with people and help them raise capital for their particular deals. But in the process of writing the book, I learned a lot because it forced me to think something through in a really fractionalized, detailed manner. There's a ton of lessons, I'm sure, that people can learn from reading your book, but what are some of the lessons that you learned in the process of actually writing the book?
I laugh to myself, Hunter, when you say that, because it's almost like you hear somebody else that has a shared experience. So many people write a book and they think that, oh, what a joy this is, how idealistic, get back and just let the flow come through you. And this is going to be fantastic. It's struggle, man. It's so much struggle because you really do get down to the depth of things. You try to go simple, but not overly simple. So yeah, I was always struggling to just address that. It puts a smile on my face to hear that you struggled. So there's a lot of lessons. I was writing this book for my son, right? Just the things I do right, the things I've done wrong, and the lessons that I leave behind. I think some of the more interesting things are the paradoxes of what I believed when I was 20 versus what I believed when I was 50, let's say. When I was 20, I was getting out of college, 24, I always thought that maybe wealth wouldn't be worth the struggle because it just looked so complex. It would take up so much of your life. It would be so complicated. I didn't know if I wanted that. But what I found was that for me, it required simplicity. It really did. I couldn't have focused on one thing if I was chasing too many other things. And it's almost a relief to have one large goal for me. The saying being that if you chase too many rabbits, you catch none, right? For me, it's almost like, okay, let's get clear now, focus. And so simplicity. When I was 20, I thought about, wealth, and I had the conception that people who strove for wealth would be materialistic, maybe shallow. I had those ideas coming through this Catholic education of mine. And I found just the opposite. For me to get to financial freedom, I had to cultivate a sense of detachment, whereas people around me coveted and were attached to their physical properties. I had to back away. I lived below my means. I delayed gratifications. I became less materialistic in the pursuit of wealth. So those are the kind of things that were really, for me, a surprise. No question, we talked about vital engagement, time effectiveness. Boy, forget it. If you can't use your time, if you can't get that under control, you can't control anything that'll move you forward, period. You just have to get a handle on your schedule and then track it to make sure that you're doing what you think you should be doing. And then sacrifice. Let's talk about sacrifices because there are sacrifices, but there's so much worship these days to work-life balance, and there's negativity talked. When we talk about too much work, we call it workaholism and things like this. And we used to call it a virtue to put forth a sacrifice, and I put forth the sacrifice, but I kept my kids in the loop, and they understood why the sacrifices mattered, and that's what really helps. They got an education through me. So these are the kind of things that happen. You have to have courage to become wealthy, but you have to have caution and courage. And you have to learn to balance those things because courage can drive you off a cliff. Caution can keep you from driving. And so it's all those kind of things, Hunter. There's so much to it. And to me, it's really a philosophy of financial achievement that it really boils down to a way of life.
I really like that. And I like the comments on sacrifice. I feel like, first of all, the phrase work-life balance is a relatively new phrase, especially when you're talking about the history of human beings. I mean, just the concept of an 8-hour workday is something that has not been around for very long. And I know that we don't have to go too crazy with this topic, but I think that a lot of people have the misconception that unions are responsible for the 8-hour work week, as if the difference between us in the 1500s and us in the 1900s is someone going, hey, you're only allowed to work 8 hours a day, as if people didn't want to do that all along. The technology allows that to be even within the realm of possibility. And so we've seen this massive shift where now you can get so much done that the concept of work-life balance can even be a thing. So I think it's important, but to your point, it gives you the misunderstanding that the people that are ultra successful don't make sacrifices. It is absolutely true that they do almost always, but especially in the beginning of their career. Your mission of going from 30 in debt to 50 financially free, that moment was the moment for you where sacrifices were made. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that you can't spend time with your family? No. Does it mean that some time with your family is going to be sacrificed? Almost certainly. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, to be honest with you. I think it's like they say an airplane coming off the ground, 80% of the fuel was used in getting that darn thing up in the air, and then it's just gliding after that. I wouldn't say it's gliding after the first 5 years, but there is a momentum that just carries forth. After my first 5 years of transitioning between 30 to 35, that's where like the rivets are ready to fall off of the plane for me. Everything's a struggle. But then once you get up there, you just have to continue with that momentum. Getting into the whole sacrifice thing, the work-life balance, I think it's a concept these days, a construct that causes a lot of people to feel just plain guilty. Because the more you love your kids, the more you want to protect and provide and have opportunities for them that maybe you didn't have. All good stuff. But you have to get out there by playing offense to bring that stuff to them so you walk out the door. It causes a lot of guilt. In the book, The Wealthy Gardener, there's so much of the whole parable built around sowing and reaping. There's a parable, and this is a great way to frame it, to think of a farmer that has this big acreage to sow every spring. But he just marks off 1/3 of his land. And he just plants there. And every year he gets to sit down at 3:00 every summer. And the other farmers are working. And they finally come over and say, what the heck are you doing? He says, you work how you work. I work how I work. I don't like sacrifice. I'm sticking right here to this ordinary plot, just 1/3 of my land. And it sounds ludicrous, right? Well, we're using about 1/3 of our time. There's a whole 2/3 of free time out there. You can just use a portion of that and still make strides in life. That's what I found for me. I could just increase myself into some of the unused time beyond that plot that I was already working on a little bit more. And that's enough. That's what I found.
In that stage, especially the early stages where you started to feel the pressure mounting, not only from your family, but from the financial predicament you found yourself in, how did you avoid burnout in pursuit of something wildly challenging and far out?
I would say that it's all about a why for me. Honestly, it wasn't an option. How do I prevent burnout? I would exercise. That was one thing I would certainly do. See, the goal was fixed. I had to have that. I had to have some sort of control of my time. My grandfather was a coal miner. He went into a hole every day of his life and came out 10 hours later. Did that for 40 years. I realize I'm not a coal miner. I realize it's not that bad for me. But when you're only paying for food, shelter, clothing, and debt, and you have no hope, it's not too much different in the mental mindset that can start to plague you. I had to overcome that. I couldn't live my life like that. I couldn't have my kids see me like that. What are some of the things that I did to prevent burnout? I can't tell you how much I believe in exercise. Not just for the physical body, but for the strength of your mind. That was even if it's as small as a face sweat, 15 minutes. I never skipped that. It was probably my go-to, like just how people might go to bars to drink. I would go to exercise to try to give myself a peak physiological state to combat any kind of weakness in me. And I would find myself stronger after I do that. I felt more invincible after I do that. And I learned that that's a choice. I can feel bigger if I exercise. So I would say that was the number one thing that I did to prevent burnout, Hunter, to be honest with you. And then I know you're an exerciser. I listen to your podcast and you're insane enough to run a 7:15 average marathon. I certainly don't compete with that, but I can get myself feeling good enough to keep the consistency and the persistence of the work that was required.
Yeah, I appreciate the shout out. And I really do. I think that is a very, very powerful concept. And I think that people are starting now to get wind of it as it's become so clear that the science is just undeniable at this point, that to a certain extent, strength and endurance and the combination of both, redlining yourself to one degree or another intermittently is such a powerful concept because it puts everything else on track, especially if you're really challenging yourself. You have to sleep well. You have to eat well, and you're going to be more compelled to do those things as opposed to more compelled to eat ice cream, for example. And this is something that's really important right now as we're going through this, all these concerns around COVID-19 is that, and the shutdowns regarding this, is that people's worst tend to be pulling on them. And so I've been a huge proponent of working out on the show, meditation, and also kind of intraday meditation, I think is really important. So, working out, for example, is a good way to release some of that stress, but it's also good to avoid building up all that stress in the first place. So meditation and intraday meditation, both really important. Let's talk about how this has been received. I mean, first of all, how old is your son now? And how did you kind of go about presenting this? That this is an incredible work of art that you've put so much time into. What is the correspondence now, given that you've already written the book and achieved what you set out to achieve?
I'll break that into a couple of questions there that you asked. The first one is, how do you get a 19-year-old to read a book that you write of life lessons when you're a dad? Obvious question, right?
Yeah.
So I tricked him, Hunter. Quite frankly, I tricked him. Kids are tricky little fellas, and it's okay for a parent to trick them back. So he was in college. I had just finished up and I retired myself. I got to the point where I looked backwards and I thought, boy, I learned so much myself. It's just a shame that if I don't just at least try to help my next generation understand my values, understand my principles, things that don't change, and pass those on. And then here's the baton, take it from here. How do you get them to take a look at that? I said, Mike, I tell you what, I retired. I'm now kind of thinking about one of the craziest things I've ever done in my life. I'm thinking about writing a book, and I might need an editor. Would you mind putting your eyes on this thing for me and keep me from making a fool of myself? Yeah, I can do that. I mean, he's a really competent kid, and we have this agreement that I'm looking for you to try to tell me where I'm being stupid. I'm not looking for you to try to tell me where it's great. Don't try to do that to me. He's a finance guy in school, so he's used to people coming at him hard. He comes at me hard. And it really turned into this awesome, just a magical 3 years where I would write and write and write for 50 hours a week in my basement. Every Sunday, I would shoot him an email. We would talk about maybe one or two lessons. And we would debate them back and forth, back and forth. And what was interesting to me is he brought a lot to the table. He would challenge me on some things, which meant I wasn't clear enough. As an author, if your audience doesn't understand you, it's your fault. You have to make it clearer. And so, okay, I'd argue back and forth. And we did this process forever. And so, yeah, he went through it. 3 years later, we're done. Now what? So we decided to self-publish it, and it took off on its own. And, like you said, number 46 on Audible, a lot of unintended consequences happened afterwards, but it was all about just he and I before it was ever, out there in the world. How's he doing now? I can tell you at the age of 25, he's probably has as much money saved as I had at the age of 35. So people say, well, money's not everything. Well, this is a money book. Okay. And money does give you options. Money won't buy happiness. Yeah, whatever. There are more important things in life than money. Yeah, but you can focus on these important things
Right.
if you have enough money, right? So maybe he's not to the stage where he says, well, this is just the fulfillment of my life. Maybe this isn't what I want to do forever. But he's got to have a big wad of money by the time he's 30 years old. And he can make choices that other people who aren't saving money will not be able to make. And he saves over 50% of his income. So he thinks like a 40-year-old. I'm very proud of him.
So I'm actually very interested about this topic because everything that you have said, I am very much aligned with in terms of kind of understanding money is the tool. Unfortunately, I spent a ton of time in school and in college and was interested in economics and was interested in finance and studied those things formally, but I didn't really learn much until I left academia. In the sense that almost none of the skills, almost none of the things that I think about all these important topics are at all related to what I spent 12 or 16 years learning about. What are your thoughts on that? I'm sure that you relate to that in a lot of ways, in the sense that probably the people that were most impactful in your perspective on money and perspective on investing were things that you had to find out yourself as opposed to were told to you. And then you mentioned that your son did go to college. I'm interested to hear your thoughts of kind of the state of college and as it relates to the content of your book.
Well, I say actions speak louder than words. So the question you're asking me was, what do I think about the state of affairs of education for money and the books out there? Keep in mind that I worked all my life for financial freedom. This was my goal. And now that I have it, I might as well have just given you a ticket that says 3 years of my life. Here it is. And what I get for that ticket is the Wealthy Gardener book. It took forever and it took a lot of strength and it took 3 years off of my life that I'll never get back. And I worked in a basement forever just on that. So if I was really satisfied with the state of affairs, why would I ever do that? And with my free time, with my freedom that I've earned over all these years, right? So yeah, I'm with you. I think my own lack of preparedness was the thing for me. Coming out of the middle class, I always think that I was born twice. I was born at age 0, and then I was reborn at age 24 when I got spit out into the real world. Each birth was very painful for me. And yeah, man, I just felt like, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just pass that baton and give people the understanding? Now, you're not going to make their life easier, but how about we just have a framework where a person can actually learn what you've learned. And what was so important to me was there's so many books written on wealth and money, and they're all about math and formulas and 10 steps, this and that. I didn't want that. I wanted a story that would give people the experience, the good and the bad, and it would internalize these principles into their lives. It would get deeper than just the understanding of a math finance type book, right? Like there's certain things, let's go back to you and your marathon. There's certain techniques that you have to master. But there's only certain things that a person will understand if they've finished a marathon. And it's all about that 18-mile mark. It's all about the fortitude, the mindset, the determination, all that kind of stuff that you have to experience by doing. What if I could give a person the experience through a book? And so that's why I really wrote that book, not as just instruction, but also as a kind of a story form to give people that feeling who hasn't done it yet, the experience, who want it, but they don't know where to even start. So you can start with knowing what it's like and then take it from there. That's why I wrote it. And yeah, I wouldn't have given 3 years of my life for it. If I was satisfied with what was out there, I would have easily given my son a book and just focused on my own exercise and training. It would have been a lot easier.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny because a lot of the work we've done in pursuit of financial freedom, it's so that we can take time off, we can take on vacations, we can go to Mexico for a month if we want to, and yet we choose to dedicate our time not to do that. We choose to dedicate our time to share the information with others. We want to be around other people. We want to work hard because we enjoy working. It's pretty remarkable, especially true in the real estate business. There's a lot of talk in the world about following your passion and term Dan Sullivan uses, unique ability, finding out unique ability, something that you love doing and focusing on that specific skill. What are your thoughts on pursuing your passion versus pursuing something that may be a more direct line to financial freedom? I think people are very familiar with real estate as being a very direct line to financial freedom, but some people aren't passionate about real estate, like I am, and it sounds like you are as well. What are your thoughts on that? And do you consider yourself to be passionate about financial freedom or real estate? And is that necessary to actually achieve those things?
All good questions. First of all, am I passionate about real estate? I'll tell you a story whenever, when I went through it all, I'm in practice, I'm building my rentals, but I'm running out of money. To build a rental business is a cash feeding machine. And so I slowly ventured into flipping as well. Didn't want to, but that was another means for me to start generating money that could then go down into the bigger snowball of rentals. And so people saw a lot of things happening in my life. And when I turned 49 and I backed out of it, I'm not flipping anymore. I'm not looking for any more rentals anymore. They're saying, boy, do you miss it? You must really miss that. And I scratch my head and I think, I really never did this for the bricks and mortar, for the properties, for what everybody saw. I didn't do it. I was at best a cash flow manager. That's what it was to me. And nobody can see that part of it. So to me, I could have transferred this real estate to bubblegum machines. I don't care. Car washes, laundromats. It could have been just as exciting to me in those other fields. So for me, if you're asking my point of view, no, I wasn't enthralled by it. In fact, there's a lot of disadvantages to real estate the way I did it. You're dealing with a lot of tough contractors, tough renters, there's a lot of, if you look at the Dr. John life, I'm hanging around good people dressed up. They're all kind to me. Mm-hmm. On the other side, Dirty John, I'm out there. My kids say, don't say that, Dad. It makes you sound like a pervert. Dirty John's out there in the houses, though, and he's with the contractors. He's screaming. He's using a whole different language set. You're always having problems. You're backed up. It looks like a mess. Well, I did it so that I could build the cash flow, right? There are intrinsic rewards. That's a difficult question for me. When you ask me about passion, I don't like the word. Quite frankly, I don't like the word. I think it puts so much pressure on people. I think so many people are saying, I can't find my passion. Well, okay. I understand that. Maybe you're looking for a soulmate that's not there. Just try to find a friend. Just find the kind of job that you can give yourself to. I talk to my kids about this because young people will always want to know, like, is it important for me to like what I do? Yes. Yes, it is. Is it important for me to love what I do? No. No, it's not. Why is it important to have like a sense of fulfillment about what you do? Because this thing that we're after, if we're after financial freedom, which is what you asked, and that's what I was after, it's going to require a lot of you, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of stamina. And you're just better aligned with things that are intrinsically rewarding to you, the set of problems that are best suited to your individuality. That's what is more sustainable for the long haul, the long fight. And even though that Dr. John was a nicer life over there, quite frankly, I was more suited to the Dirty John guy over here. I was really good at that side of it. And the Dr. John, I loved the patients, but there's a lot of that business I didn't like. So it's really important to align yourself, I believe, with your individuality so that you can then have the stamina to finish that marathon, which is wealth.
Interesting. I really like the clarification regarding the disadvantages of real estate compared to your other job. That's something that we really haven't talked about, but it's a perfect example. I really like that because, yes, it is true. Dealing with contractors can be challenging as opposed to dealing with clients where they're signing up to go with you and they really like you and they've moved over to you because they've gotten good referrals from you. It's a very interesting dynamic, one that I haven't really thought of because I've worked in real estate basically since I graduated college. So very interesting there. So there's a lot of listeners of this show that are of a very wide variety of levels of sophistication. Listeners of the show tend to be very interested in getting into the details, but generally speaking, that can be someone who still has a full-time job completely unrelated to real estate, hasn't yet done a real estate transaction, or someone that has $1 billion under management. People listening to this show right now fit both of those descriptions. What would you say to someone who has a full-time job, a very challenging job, let's say in consulting, and they're starting to, through this podcast or others, start to get wind of the fact that regardless of how much money they make in their consulting job, it doesn't create a clear pathway to being able to take a bunch of time off without worrying about your income coming in, or what most people refer to as being financially free. What would be your guidance to them in terms of creating a path so that they can see a vision towards that financial freedom?
Easy. I can tell you that because I lived it. Test the waters. You really have to do it that way. Like, people would think that I might have said as a chiropractor, okay, I'm busy. And when I started thinking about this, I'm like, I do not have time for anything else. I have young kids. I have a practice. I exercise. where's the time? I lived it. So you should just test the waters, though. Put time constraints on it. Say, okay, I'm going to give this 4 hours of my week. Small little amount, right? And then you go forward. You learn and you try. And maybe this is the right path, maybe it's not. It's getting back to that, this is what I want, but I'm going to keep my options open until I want to commit. That's how I started. And it wasn't until I started seeing a little bit more of the success that I started taking a closer look at this and saying, okay, maybe I'll cut back a little more now. And what happens is I can tell you that when you find the right thing, if that's real estate for you, you'll make time. That's how it worked for me. And it does, even if you don't see where it is right now, go forward and you'll start to see the payoff of that. I can tell you that for me, it became such a lucrative possibility going forward that I started seeing that possibility as being preferable to my full-time job. My peers, I have friends that are orthodontists and doctors and DOs and chiropractors. They thought I was nuts. I'm pulling back on my practice hours. I pushed them down to 30 so that I can make room outside of my clinic to make the passive income. They couldn't see it because passive income is something that builds slowly somewhere far away. Whereas all the other people out there, they're working in a framework of more hours billable within their practices, more, the consultants, there's within their consulting business. But if you start to see that flame, if it works like that for you, you'll start to see the reallocation of your time and you'll catch a fire that'll make it happen if it's right for you. So don't worry about the big picture. Don't swallow the whole well at one time. Just test the waters. If it's right for you, I can tell you, you'll give more than you think you'll ever give. That's me speaking from experience.
I really like that. And there has never been a better time to go all in on education.
Never.
There's total insecurity and question marks all over the marketplace, but there is a massive amount of free, high quality conversations of industry leaders in a variety of sectors that you can tap into by just Googling it. And in those conversations, people don't withhold information. There's literally an open conversation, just like the way you wrote the book. You didn't say, for the $25,000 version, click here. It's like, here is actually the information that I think you need to know. And you can buy it on Amazon.
I will tell you when I take a knee and I start to sob in a dirty duplex because I used all of it. I used everything. I want people to know that so that when they get to the point where they're just so tested, they feel so defeated, they realize, okay, this isn't me being weak. No. This might just be me at my best because I have given everything. I've come to my maximum edge of capacity, and that is a good place to be. And I have this in my mental bank here because I remember this guy did the same thing too. Now, it's important to teach people how to have setbacks, how to go through adversity, and just keep walking forward, and just sometimes just go to bed that night and wake up the next day, and that's the best you can do.
Couldn't agree more. Anyone that's read my book knows how seriously I take what you just said. I think that's actually a great note to end it on because, look, if you hit a roadblock, it does not mean you're the only person that's hit a roadblock. It means that this is like the part of your career that you can later tell your story about and include that. And by the way, anyone that has achieved any level of success, it's a badge of honor to have those types of stories. Those crying alone in the rehab stories that we all have.
Yeah, if I can add one thing to what you just said here, you'll notice I tiptoed around not saying one word, and it starts with an F. And so did you. We didn't say the F word, and the F word is failure. You used the word roadblock. I used the word setback. I hate when people say, well, I failed here. How do you deal with failure? And I want to say, what? You stopped breathing? What do you mean you failed? I hate that. My kids aren't allowed to say the word failure. They think it's the F word. So like when you talked about a roadblock, okay. You talk about a setback, okay. You talk about adversity, obstacles, okay. Not once is that considered a failure. Not once. I've never failed. I don't feel like I've ever failed because I could always rebound. I could always figure out what to do. I go to bed that night and I wake up the next day. But that is a huge mindset to me. There is no such thing as failure unless you die doing what you're trying to do. Then it's failure. It's over then.
Awesome. Well, John, listen, I really appreciate you coming on. Really looking forward to diving into the book, and I appreciate you sending me the copy. Much appreciated. Before we jump off, though, let the listeners know how they can learn more about you, your book, your podcast, etc.
I like to make these things really easy, Hunter. So I assume there's going to be some show notes at the bottom of this thing.
That's right.
I'll refer them down to the show notes so they don't have to go search for anything. Hunter will send you over to if you want to see my website, there will be a dedicated page just for this interview. So the things we actually talked about, the principles, there will be further explained on my site. Like you said, I don't have anything. There's no upsells. There's no courses. There's no nothing. I'm a dad who wrote a book who has a lot of unintended consequences here. So I appreciate you letting me be on your podcast, and we'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Well, John, thanks so much. We'll do it soon.
Okay.
All right, listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, the contact information for our guest will be available in the show notes page, which is hosted on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Don't forget, if you want access to some of the free goodies that I'm talking about at the beginning of these episodes, like free ebooks, weekly investor emails, and articles about some of the most important investment-related topics, make sure that you have created an account with CFC because this stuff is automatically available. You can do this by going to cashflowconnections.com and signing up as an accredited investor. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hunterthompson@cashflowconnections.com. Thanks again.